now going to begin session two, the benefits of an active archive. So first we're going to hear from Dean Felicetti, Director of Data Risk and Remediation at Sullivan Strickler, who'll talk about compliance and data sovereignty. Over to you, Dean.
Thanks a lot, Drew. It's interesting too when we lead into this, where obviously we're only given as a roundtable a few minutes each, and where each one of us on our topics could probably talk quite a bit. When you lead into discussions around, especially, some of the information that John provides regarding 500 petabytes with an infinite retention policy, you immediately say, okay, well, how does that fit with compliance rules for a particular region, a location? Same with sovereignty. Also with Bhupinder, talking about wearables and band-aids that collect information, that sends information back to the mothership for analysis, or whatever that may be. Each one of us, whether it's Rich talking about videos, or Jason speaking essentially along parallel discussion lines around retail information, which is one bucket, as you see in this slide. So in this slide in particular, if we were to generalize compliance and data sovereignty, I put them in three buckets, although obviously there are many others. But generally, how is the information that's being collected, managed, and regulated, is driven by not only an organization, obviously, but state level, country level, region level, et cetera, et cetera. They're driven by outside directives as well as inside legal, risk, IT, information governance, as well as storage. Active Archive plays a massive role in not only creating an accessible means to data, but also an effective way to respond to regulations and compliance. The three buckets, if you look at healthcare, there's patient data, financial services, there's customer information, financial data, retail, as well as customer information, sales information, et cetera, all have their own sets of digital assets that need to be regulated or are regulated based on those regions, especially if there's connectivity across jurisdiction. Next slide, please. How does it affect us? You can go back one, please, I think. There we go. How does it affect us? How we recommend our data storage solutions, how we use an active archive to meet the requirements of regulators. So that does include solutions that help map what is being stored, identify, and make sure that we're in compliance. And, we touched about, upon this briefly, but AI now is playing an active role in creating labels and containers around that information that's being stored to help storage, help risk, help governance get a better sense of, are they meeting the requirements of regulators in their jurisdiction based on how a file is contained? Does it meet those requirements? Also, a key component is, how is that data being mapped? Again, utilizing an active archive with a component of AI, as well as the ability to manage the container and indexes of files, helps produce that mapping information. How the legacy data plays a role in this world, again, with accessibility and how it's being remediated, how we're handling retention policies for the sake of disposition. So now you have accessibility, you're answering the regulators, you're providing information back to show you're in compliance, but now it falls out of that. How can you then easily go through a disposition exercise? Next slide, please. Often, as I think it was Rich that said the four-letter word maybe when it comes to archive and legacy data, et cetera. Often when a data mapping exercise or a governance exercise or an investigation or discovery request is made, archive information or legacy data becomes that four-letter word because it can be considered outdated, accessibility issues, it's end of life. Look at some of the platforms that are actually going end of life this December. Will give you a sense. So it raises flags with a risk component. If it's not accessible, how do we know we're compliant? So now organizations are making more of a shift towards getting a better handle on what they have, obviously through lofty fines, but you can see as privacy and regulation rules are now being enacted, obviously here in the US, but internationally, there are governing bodies that are managing some of these things, which is now pushing organizations to follow suit with how they're managing their archives. How are they managing their legacy data? You can go to the next slide, please. Some of the impacts of where archive data and accessibility and legacy data falls. Obviously, legal and regulatory compliance. Those are the big ones. They're usually lumped in because regulatory and the interpretation of rules may be driven by outside, not only counsel, but inside counsel, which will work hand in hand with IT, which ultimately touches our audience here. How the data resides, is it cross-jurisdictional? Are you storing data in the cloud, which is somebody's computer or storage or a series of those? And then is it being imaged and put to tape somewhere? So how you can map to that information. Is it retrievable? Is it accessible? Is it end of life? So having platforms in massive databases that are proprietary to an organization doesn't matter to regulations and compliance if you still are required to not only identify that information, but provide the information as needed. Does it fall within the security requirements of the regulations? Are there audit trails in place in documentation that help articulate what's being stored that's falling under sovereignty rules and compliance rules? What are those retention policies? What do they look like? Are they vetted? Is there consent? Has there, are we answering the consent policy, the notifications now that we are splashing on our websites because we have to? Next slide. And in general, how we get there, utilizing Active Archive makes it much easier for us to not only report on what's being mapped, but deliver data as digital assets, especially in today's world. What may have been a legal request to reply to compliance and regulatory concerns is now the norm due to several organizations going through restructuring, large-scale organizations going through restructuring and M&A and bankruptcy. How does that digital information become an asset, but that asset fall under the compliance and regulatory rules of the jurisdiction you're in? That's a lot of information in a small period on a massive topic. But if any questions come up, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dean. And next, we're going to hear from Carlos Sandoval, IBM Worldwide Product Manager for Enterprise Tape. We'll talk about the cost savings of an active archive.
Thank you, Drew. Well, now let's talk about costs. First, let's do a quick recap on the data growth projections. As noted on further research forecast, enterprise data is delineated in multiple layers based on its access frequency. Charts on the left depict these layers as mentioned by John. It shows hot data on top from nanoseconds to milliseconds, then the warm data from milliseconds to seconds, cool from minutes to 24 hours, then cold from days to weeks, and frozen data from weeks to years. It is projected that the amount of data being delivered to all layers will continue to expand in the upcoming years, but the data distribution percentage will be varying. For instance, projection for data destined to hot and warm data layers will shrink from roughly 25% in 2020, and this is 8% hot and 17% warm, to roughly 20% or 7% hot and 13% warm out of the annual total in 2030. Meanwhile, the cool and cold data layers are expected to remain fairly constant at roughly 20% and 25% respectively of the annual total. And the frozen data layer will expand. This one is expected to grow from 30% to 35% of the annual total. Now, move to the next slide. Let's take a look to the cost of storing digital data. According to 2022 analysis made by ArcServe, the average cost of storage a single terabyte of file data is now pegged at $3,351 per year. And this is just the beginning, because storage is only one component of the total cost. The opportunity for long-term storage will grow to over 1.8 terabyte annually by 2030. And this is a significantly higher 37.4% compound annual growth rate. While the opportunity in flash and long-term storage will see acceleration, further research predicts that the HDD will grow shipments at a much slower rate of only 25% CAGR. Finally, moving to the next slide, let's see our recommended strategies for controlling cost. As data continues to grow in the data center and cost of storage in active tiers continue to be high, the need to manage data is more important to the bottom line than ever before. Managing cost basically means two things: planning for data growth and mitigating cost with intelligent tiering, which basically allows placing the right data on the right tier at the right time. Embracing tier storage basically results in significant savings, especially when a lower cost storage technology like tape is used. In this example on the right-hand side on the chart, an equivocal 20 petabytes of archived data growing at 5% yearly results in a 75% reduction in total cost of ownership compared to an HDD archive storage solution. With the proper tier technology, a reduction of the cost of ownership in active archives that have hybrid HDDs and tape storage technologies is evident. With that, we'll turn back to you, Drew.
All right, thank you, Carlos. And next, we're going to hear from Paul Lupino, Director of Data Management Technology Solutions at Iron Mountain, who's going to talk about digitization of existing archived data. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, everybody, for the time today. So I'll be brief. Basically, most of the customer conversations I have these days are around, can you make my legacy data or archive data accessible and put it into a format that I can then use it and search it, right? So they're kind of maybe not using those words, but they're effectively asking for an active archive of some sort. And I think that customers are changing some of the ways they do business, and they're either changing backup software, they're moving to or from the cloud. This month alone, I've had 3 customers say, I'd like to take some of the data I'm not using in the cloud and put it back on tape, right? Or they're changing technology data centers, or they're buying or selling, companies. And so all of these things cause sort of problems with legacy data. If we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So the challenges are, do you have the people to do this stuff? Do you still have the environments and the hardware to actually access these things? Can you afford to do it, right? And how do you sort of want to deal with the modernization of the data? And I think that the big challenges we're seeing, in addition to the, can you help me, sort of make this data useful, is also, can you look across my enterprise and tell me, everything I've got, physical and digital, and help me get it into something usable for the future. The other trend I think we're seeing is companies where 5 years ago would say, I have to keep everything because it's too risky to get rid of it, have flipped the other way and now say, I can't keep it because it's too risky if I have it, right? And so as I listen to all the other speakers, Iron Mountain kind of is at the sort of intersection point of a lot of these different issues because we sort of view ourselves as like a data brokerage, right? We'll help you do whatever it is you want to do. If it's access data, if it's move it around, if it's destroy it, and sort of do all of the above. If we can go to the next slide. And so finally, this is just how we sort of approach it, which is a IT data lifecycle, right? And so sometimes you have to store it, sometimes you have to access it, sometimes you're doing something with it, right? Moving it, like I said, to or from the cloud. And then there's the sort of disposal part of it. How do I effectively get rid of this data when it's time to get rid of it? And like I said, we're kind of thinking of ourselves these days as a brokerage because we work with everybody, right? We're working with all the cloud providers, we're working with all the customers to sort of combine these solutions to make an end-to-end solution for customers' needs these days. So that's just a little bit on kind of what we're seeing with getting access to archive data. So back to you, Drew.
Thank you, Paul. And now we have Craig Vanderburg from Architecta, who's going to address the question, what is the single most unresolved pain point concerning ransomware?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Craig Vanderburg from Architecta. Thanks, Drew. Just a quick, kind of context thing. Our system is called MediaFlux, and it is really aimed at doing the types of things that Carlos was talking about, and then still more. But effectively, it's something that allows you to implement tiering between different storage and amongst a bunch of other features. And this is one of the other things that you can do. So in addition to just creating a large data management lake, if you will, with whatever storage you currently have and whatever you get in the future, which our product does, has some really unusual properties, and one of them is the ability to do things like this. I'm sure that all of you must know what ransomware is, but it's malicious software that encrypts a company's data and demands payment for its release. And ransomware attacks can lead to significant financial losses and business disruptions. Both companies and industry have responded mostly by putting in defenses against an attack and then air gapping the recovery data, but a big pain point remains when you do things that way. Next slide, please. Data recovery time is the big issue with this. And in terms of what the financial burden is there, that this Sophos outfit reports that the average total cost of recovery from a ransomware attack more than doubled from $761K to $1.85 million in 2021. In terms of operational disruption, a recent report from Checkpoint highlighted that the recovery time from ransomware attacks increased to an average of 14.9 days. So that's a doubling in just a couple of years from 2021. And the recovery from this is very resource intensive. It can be very laborious and require the right strategies in place a priori to even get to where you can have a quick and safe data recovery. Next slide, please. Architecta's MediaFlux product has, well, it is, amongst other things, a versioning file system. So a file system that can be backed by any kind of storage, technology you could think of. It looks to users like a file system regardless of what's backing it. And that enables us to do some really interesting things, like having a versioned file system, which ours is. This allows organizations to restore files quickly and easily from an earlier unencrypted version. So recovery in this context is just instantaneous. And, more than that, you can see in this right pane, there's a self-service user web app we provide that allows people to scoot a time slider around and just get back to the version of their file or files that they need, as they existed at a certain time. But, in addition to that self-service user portal, which is shown in this picture, you can also use this capability to recover from ransomware much more effectively than what people usually do. Next slide, please. And I think that's it, unless there are any questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Craig. It's interesting you talked about the cost, the average being 1.75 million. Well, I'm sitting in a room in the MGM Grand right now, where I believe the cost was 100 million. So it can be much higher. Anyway, thanks for your talk, Craig. All right, so moving on to the next talk here on session 2, Intelligent Data Management. And this is from David Thompson, Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at QStar Technologies.
Thank you, Drew. I hope that I've got a lawn person outside right now. I just decided to turn up right now, so I do hope that you can still hear me. So originally we were looking at the intelligent data management sphere and how we're progressing out of really where we started for many years, which is human intelligence running everything. Obviously defining best practices, policies, etc., to meet the requirements of backup and archive. We've moved through, and many organizations are already deploying some form of artificial intelligence to provide visibility into data silos, action, migrations of content based on cost or performance, and leading to other suggestions for data protection and obviously future accesses as well. The third stage starts to become to prescribe those responses. So defining what should be the next result, but actually not implementing them, which would be the fourth stage, where automation is the final goal, where artificial intelligence basically takes over from the IT staff and sort of does most things automatically. So the first two, stage 2 and stage 3 are really artificial intelligence assisted, and stage 4 is artificial intelligence controlled for those environments. So move on to the next one. Thank you. This is a little bit over the top, perhaps, in terms of a graphic. We're certainly not saying that AI and HI is sort of butting heads over who should be running this. I do believe that there's an awful lot of really good stuff that's coming through from use of AI. The biggest issue that we always see is well, who's running the operation? If your AI is starting to run the operation, well, is it trustworthy? Trustworthiness really is all about predictability ahead of the fact and then accountability after the fact. But can you really use AI if something goes wrong? How does that become accountable? What we're seeing is increasingly, and some people talked about this at the beginning, laws coming in or recommendations coming in that AI is not given free range to do everything it potentially could do. So the US Department of Defense requires now that a human is involved in the decision-making loop wherever AI is involved. And I see that as a sort of key moving forwards, thing that we all should be aware of. The one thing that I like to sort of refer back to is sort of self-driving cars. So when they start to appear more and more, obviously we're seeing them now, seeing an awful lot of manufacturers also include insurance associated with the car, because really they are to blame if that car gets involved in an accident. Are we going to see the same thing from software providers who are now letting AI take over an organization's data storage infrastructure? Are software providers also going to need to run that insurance for organizations? Let's move on to the next one. So in summary, artificial intelligence is definitely already providing insight into how best to store and protect our valuable data. and obviously to make sure that in certain areas, we just heard about ransomware, that AI there is invaluable. The other issue, of course, is AI is also being used by those ransomware organizations to improve their own ransomware. So it's trying to actually outwit the AI that's already in there, trying to find those informations. So HI is still needed to understand where AI is providing wrong or misleading information, and therefore provide guidelines on specific business requirements. And we've been dealing, for many years now with organizations that are working in very small numbers of data types. So it's not that, this plethora of different information areas that we see. There are, but most organizations are dealing with relatively small sets, and therefore understanding how those are changing is more often an HI, human intelligence activity, to lead and then let AI take and follow those leads. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dave. All right, so now we'll go on to the Q&A portion of session 2, and we have questions come in for Carlos. Carlos, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. So in one of your slides, Carlos, you mentioned a number there, $3,351 per year for active data. And someone's asking how the cost was calculated.
Well, I can provide the report. It's all details are mentioned there. It's something I just need to look into my files. I don't have the background for the calculation right now, but something we can definitely share.
Okay, good. Well, while I have you there, I have a question for you. So that you get the big numbers often shown about the cost savings from an active archive compared to storing large amounts in disk or the cloud. What do you think is the biggest barrier to convincing people to use such an archive and use tape?
Biggest barrier. Well, I think John can also support me on that, but I heard many times that it's just that organizations are not willing to try. They are just sitting with the existing infrastructure and solutions, and it's just they're in a comfort of not trying something different, because I don't think this is really in terms of tape being complex or hard to use. I think these implementations will require some sort of moving the organizations out of their comfort zones with what they are used to and what they have, but it's sometimes hard to try to move things around and try something different. But
all right.
even with the numbers that are demonstrated, there are well, the benefits that these organizations can get with using technologies of tape.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, so that concludes session